Now this is a little bit like the old show that I did for their early Intendor radio show when I was just, oh boy, I'm sorry. All I was doing then was reading trends on like Facebook, and since then I started playing the guitar and all like that. But every now and then I read something that I want to try and read out loud. H.R. 5424, Investment Advisors Modernization Act, a get out of Madoff and other frauds for free bill passes Financial Services Committee. Posted on June 17th, 2016 by Yves Smith. One of the big downsides of this hotly contested presidential race is that it's diverted attention from legislation allowing noxious bills to move forward. One is H.R. 5424, which would allow the hedge fund and private equity industry, which are rich enough to pay for the few parking ticket level fines the SEC hands out, to escape from virtual all enforcement efforts. Worse, it would considerably weaken protections meant to stop Madoff-type frauds and leave retail investors exposed. This bill was nevertheless approved by the House Financial Services Committee last week, with 12 Democrats voting in favor. As readers know, Dodd-Frank stipulated that private equity and hedge funds beyond a modest size be regulated as investment advisors. That subjected them to SEC examinations. The initial round exposed the widespread misconduct in private equity, including what would normally be called embezzlement. Yet, the agency has fined remarkably few sanctions, and the fines have been light relative to the extent of the misconduct alleged by the SEC and unearthed by the press. To make a bad situation worse, the SEC retreated from its tough enforcement within months, and more recently has been trying to fool the chump public into believing that its weak enforcement actions are having any impact. No impact. When private equity Form ADV filings with the SEC reveal the reverse, that many firms are continuing to engage in precisely the same conduct that the SEC has deemed to be securities law violation. But even this cronyistic enforcement charade is an offense to these masters of the universe. H.R. 5424 would gut Dodd-Frank oversight. I've attached a letter from Americans for Financial Reform at the end of the post, which sets forth how this bill makes a mockery of the idea of investor protection. Let me highlight some of the elements of the bill that I found particularly troubling. Okay, I'm going to take here now. Maintenance of books and records. Not later than 90 days after the date of the enactment of this act, the Securities and Exchange Commission shall amend Section 275.204-2 of Title 17 Code of Federal Regulations to provide that an investment advisor is not required to maintain 1. Any communications or materials, including communications or materials made available in a secure electronic or physical data room used in connection with due diligence for a prospective investment if the communications or materials are subject to a confidentiality agreement. Or 2, any written communications required by paragraph A7 of such section if the communications are sent and received only by supervised persons of the investment advisor. Okay, now Yves explains it. The reason this section eviscerates enforcement is that one of the very few things the SEC has been willing to do is sometimes punish private equity firms who have made misrepresentations when marketing their funds to investors. This provision would allow private equity firms and hedge funds to purge all their electronic files of any and all records of what they said or wrote when peddling their wares. This would make it well nigh impossible to prove misrepresentations or lies, is one way of putting it. Fraud. No fraud could be proven because they get to destroy everything. This provision may also seem remarkable, but isn't. Brochure delivery, not later than 90 days after the date of the enactment of this ad, the Commission shall amend Section 275.204-3C of Title 17 Code of Federal Regulations to provide that an investment advisor is not required to deliver a brochure or brochure supplement to a client that is a limited partnership, limited liability company, or other pooled investment vehicle for which each limited partner, member, or other equity owner has received before purchasing a security issued by the pooled investment vehicle, a prospectus, private placement memorandum, or other offering document containing to the extent material and understanding of the pooled investment vehicle, the business of the pooled investment vehicle, and the securities being offered by the pooled investment vehicle, substantially the same information as would be required by Part 2A or 2B of Form ADV at the time of delivery of the brochure or brochure supplement, as the case may be. This provision says, because I couldn't hardly tell what it said, this provision says if the information is in our Form ADV, it's effectively in our marketing materials. But as we've seen, even investors with large dedicated private equity teams like CalPERS and CalSTARS, which is CAL, California, PERS, and California STRS is, I think it had, that's a lot of the investments of the California state pension funds is what I last grasped, but I could be wrong, okay? Do not read this Form ADV's, we've seen even investors with large dedicated private equity teams like CalPERS do not read their Form ADVs. So this is a way to evade disclosure by removing it from fund prospectuses, which historically have been the required medium for making decisions, and relegating it to documents that investors seldom, if ever, consult. That's that makes me think of the reader's report that I have for my screenplay that is all that most producers would read of the story to make a decision whether to greenlight the film. It's called the reader's report. And I've written brochures. Fun, but they were like, for sales, anyway. People look at the brochures. Fund managers will be allowed to make misleading advertisements to accredited investors. The bar for being an accredited investor is not very high. It includes individuals who make more than, okay, this is the qualified investor. It's $200,000 a year is where you can start to be fraudulently lifted of your funds. Okay, in high-cost cities like New York and San Francisco, where salaries are correspondingly elevated, that includes quite a few people who probably don't know what they're doing. They're getting wages in that amount to be able to keep going. In addition, certain groups of wealthy individuals who are routinely targeted by fraudsters because they are unsophisticated, such as professional athletes, top entertainers, and widows and former wives of rich men. Boy, doesn't that make you think. Okay, finally, the bill creates exemptions to the requirement that investment advisors have their holdings independently audited at least annually. Okay, this is like deferred taxes the rich get that we don't get. The exemptions on the surface appear to apply to closely held funds. Boy, this thing is just flat out incredible. There's one more long paragraph to read. Okay, so let's get to it. Finally, the bill creates exemptions to the requirement that investment advisors have their holdings independently audited at least annually. The exemptions on the surface appear to apply to closely held funds. It carves out ones whose investors are officers, directors, and employees of not just the fund manager, but also of affiliated persons, their officers, directors, and employees, current and former family members, and officers, directors, and employees who provide or have entered into contracts to provide services, and not just to the investment vehicle itself, but to any of its clients. Oh boy! And then she says, it's easy to see how this provision could be abused by, say, having someone enter into a sham or trivial service agreement to get access to a supposedly hot manager. You can even hear the patter. The only people who can invest are friends and employees. And oh my God, have they made boatloads. But the SEC will allow you to invest if we are your client. And that's really easy to do. Just sign this contract. And you allow yourself to be bamboozled if you're an unsophisticated investor with what they consider middling wealth. As Professor Jennifer Taub stated in her testimony on the bill last month, just when private equity funds are in the sunlight thanks to Dodd-Frank, and many have been exposed in SEC examinations as in violation of the law, you are now proposing that they be able to hide their tracks. Instead of encouraging a culture of compliance, this bill would provide a loophole for investment advisor record-keeping requirements, subjecting communications to confidentiality agreements or keeping them in-house would allow advisors to destroy critical investment records. The Investment Advisors Modernization Act of 2016 is misnamed. Instead of ushering in modernity, it would send the SEC and investors back to the dark ages. Like other bills today, it is misaligned with the hearing's title. This is Orwellian doublespeak. Legislative proposals to enhance capital formation, transparency, and regulatory accountability. This bill would not enhance capital formation. Instead, it would undermine investor protection and trust, which could inhibit or drive up the cost of capital. It would not promote transparency, but allow certain private equity advisors and other private fund advisors that have been exposed as lacking in recent SEC examinations to hide their tracks. It would not encourage regulatory accountability. Instead, it would punish regulatory success, depriving the SEC of the information and tools it has been using to monitor system-wide risk, identify firm-specific risk, investigate fraud, and enforce the law. Now, these are our Democrats that supported H.R. 5424. 5424. Got to say it to remember it. Brad Sherman of California, Gregory W. Meeks of New York, David Scott of Georgia, Ed Perlmutter of Colorado, James A. Himes of Connecticut, John C. Carney, Delaware. Yeah, you bet Delaware. Terry A. Sewell, Alabama, Bill Foster, Illinois, Patrick Murphy, Florida, John K. Delaney, Maryland, Kristen Cimarron, Arizona, Joyce Beatty, Ohio, Juan Vargas, California. And you're strongly urged to email them and tell them that this vote establishes that they are captured by the financial services industry, and you will be voting against them in November as a result. And she gives their contact. It goes on. It's a long article, but like I said, what we need and must have is United States Post Office Service banking. And that was a hard read.